All right, welcome back to Tech Talk with Grandpa. It's showtime. And I'd like to thank all the people that have tuned in this evening, as well as all the people that have watched and commented on my videos. I hope you're getting something out of this. But tonight there will be no demonstrations and actually no slides. Just me yapping about some stuff. I guess I'll go ahead and get started. So when I was, let me see, I think I got my first job when I was about 12 years old. I delivered newspapers. Well, before that I'd mowed lawns and stuff, but I delivered newspapers, and then I worked all the way through, well, basically I worked pretty much continually since I was 12. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about my professional career as an electrical engineer. I got my first job in 1988, which was 33 years ago. I was in graduate school getting my master's degree at New Mexico State, and I got an interesting job was handed to me from L'Oreal Data Systems. Now, back in the mid 80s, this was in digital electronics became prevalent, and this idea of a switch capacitor filter. There were integrated circuits that actually implemented analog circuitry. There was a way to control your pole frequency let's just talk about normal terms. So, like in the olden days when you had a graphic equalizer on your stereo, and you want to tune down on the treble, you would turn a treble down. Well, that's actually affecting the gain of the high frequencies. And so some of these switch capacitor filter chips that came out from National Semiconductor would allow you to change that frequency at which the pole cutoff would occur with a digital clock. And so I was hired by L'Oreal Data Systems to investigate the noise performance as well as the phase performance of this 12-pole digital filter. And I did that in 1988. And then in 1990, when I was getting my PhD, I ended up working on that remote communication thing for for the petroleum industry. And in 1993, I graduated, and I went to Austin and had a postdoc for about 9 months. And so then last week we talked about that chemical additive injector that I designed, and it's went through its design. That was in '94, and then in '95, an offshoot from that company, I did my first startup, and that was called Wireless Scientific. We started that in 1995, and we designed radio telemetry units for the petroleum industry as well. I'll talk about that specifically, my first startup, in a future episode of Tech Talk with Grandpa. But that we had our products designed, and we were having problems with getting those to market. And I had an opportunity. This company in Atlanta came down to where we were located in Florida, and they wanted potentially to hire this company to develop a handheld recorder for them. This is 1995 now, so there was cell phones were still off in the distance, but they wanted to record. They wanted to make a digital dictation handheld for the medical industry. And so they came down to my startup, and they wanted me to, they wanted us to present our case that that company was going to be the contract manufacturer or the design house, as well as the contract manufacturer for these handhelds that they were doing. And they, I got a little heads up before they came down, that the boss was coming down, the director of engineering, and he had one question in mind, and he was going to ask it, and the person that gave me the heads up said, he's going to ask you this question, and you have to come up with an answer for it. You have to, if you, and he also said, and if you give him some bullshit, he will know it, and you're out of the running. So you better come up with an answer for that. It's got to be legitimate. You got to back it up. And so this question was, what is your process? Meaning, what is your design process? What do you end up going through? What are the steps involved in that type of thing? So what is your process? So this is an all-day meeting. About 6 people came down from Atlanta, and they met with us, and we gave our presentations. We had lunch, and in the afternoon, I was up at the whiteboard, talking about the designs that I had done, which was not many at the time. And sure enough, this guy, we'll call him Joe, asks, "What's your process?" And I sat there and thought, what do I tell him? I agonized over this because I didn't really know what the answer was. I don't know what the process is for developing products. So I had to decide if I was going to try to lay a line on him or actually tell him the truth. And I decided at that point, I was going to tell him the truth. And I said, "Joe, we don't have a process. We're a startup company, and the process is all in my head." And he says, "Well, that's an honest answer." Okay. Now, did we get that job? No, but I learned at that point in my professional career that I just got to tell the truth. People can handle the truth. What they know, what's happened because of the way that things have become, is that we as humans interacting with other humans have been we're tuned into bullshit detectors, and it's a matter of difficulty trying to figure out how bad this line is that I'm getting fed. Is it really this bad or what? But I've learned over time, if you don't know something, just tell somebody you don't know, and that's fine. It's better. And in fact, people actually respect you more if you just come out and tell them, I made a mistake. I don't know this thing. Here's the bad news. Whatever that is, just lay it out there, and they'll have to deal with it at that point. Okay, so that was in 1995. Now, that company that I ended up getting out of that first startup around probably about, I don't know, like June of 1998. And I was living, we actually had a house across the street from the beach in Florida. And my plans for the summer was to not do anything, basically be a beach bum, go boogie boarding, hang out, let my hair grow, all that stuff. And so I think it was about August. Some of the engineers from that same company, they came down to where I was living in Florida, and they wanted to interview me. And I was like, no, keep in mind, I was just going to goof around until September and then figure out what to do. They wanted to come down and interview me. And I said, sure, probably not interested, but you're welcome to come down. I figured, this is literally my stance on that, I figured I could at least get a free lunch out of these guys. Now, they're going to fly down, they're going to take off a day and do all this stuff. So I show up in this interview. I did not want to get a job. And I intentionally had like a 3 or 4 day beard growth. My hair was a disaster. I mean, it was long. It was all strung out from going in the ocean. I wore a wholly old Ocean Pacific t-shirt, and my shorts were just full of, just ratty shorts. And I showed up for this lunch, and I don't know what their reaction was for me. But we sat down and we talked about what they were working on, and this was the same company that came down before. And so now when they came down before to talk to me about the handheld, they didn't tell me specifically about their business. I mean, they said, we want to record voice and we want to be able to transmit that voice wirelessly over to some receiver. That's what they came down for. They didn't really tell us specifically what it was for. All right, so this company comes back down, and they're talking to me at lunch. and they laid out kind of what they're working on, and this was ended up being this was like $100 million product line for them, and they were the industry leader at that point with the first digital dictation system, specifically used for hospitals and attorneys and other applications. Okay, so they talked about what they did and what they needed and all that stuff. And so after lunch, they asked me, of all the pieces that we outlined in our conversation today, what pieces can you kind of help us with? And so I got a piece of paper from them and a pen, and I wrote down, okay, these are the major blocks, and I wrote down some block diagrams, some squares, put some text in them, and those were like handheld, desktop, application, the server application, the database, the interface with their transcribers. And I wrote down about 9 of these blocks. And I said, well, I guess I could help this. They wanted to know what I could help them with. So I said, well, I could help you with this, 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 and this. And I said, I guess I could help you with everything here. And they said, great. We want to hire you as our new system architect. And so I just laughed at them, and I said, you want to hire me as a system architect? I didn't even know your industry existed before lunch. And so they they hired me. They said, well, what's your rate? And I just threw out some number, and they said, can you start on Monday? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, get an airline ticket and fly up to Atlanta. We're going to start on Monday. All right, well, okay. I got a job. I got a job specifically because I didn't know anything about what they were doing. And this was mind-boggling to me. They were paying me a pretty high salary at that point. And I basically had no idea what they were doing. Okay, so when you get thrown into that scenario, when you get hired as a consultant in that case, you're coming in from the outside. And I got introduced to some of the major engineers at this company, and they despised the fact that I was there. From their perspective, management hired some outside person who knows nothing about what they're doing to come in and basically dictate what they're going to be doing. And so everybody, they wouldn't talk to me, they weren't helpful, they were just, it was not a good situation. Now, this is the first time I actually got put in a situation like this, so I didn't know how to handle it. And I knew that I had to get the main lead engineer on this project. I had to convince him that I was there to kind of to help him along. Well, so at that time there was a lot of hospital consolidation, a lot of regional and local hospitals being consolidated into a bigger chain, and they wanted to consolidate the transcription services as well. So you have all these different doctors from all these different hospitals and all these transcriptionists. And so in order for me and as well as management to kind of undertake kind of a new generation of a product, we had to go out and collect all these requirements. And so we went out and talked to hospital administrators, we talked to the users, we talked to the transcriptionists, it took us about 9 months, and we came up with literally 500 or 600 requirements that the system had to fulfill. We got them consolidated and we grouped them out, and I learned a lot about interviewing and talking with the customer base and finding out what they really want, what they like, what they don't like, how to generate requirements, and I learned a little bit about databases and that type of thing. So that was a major undertaking. And basically they had a problem. So say that let's say there's 500 doctors in this chain of hospitals, and then they have 1,000 transcriptionists. So a doctor comes in and he reads off his diagnosis, and it gets recorded in this handheld thing, and then it gets transmitted digitally over to a server. And then who out of the 1,000 transcriptionists, when they log in, what job do they get to transcribe? So they listen to the audio and then they type in a form what the transcription was. So there's a lot of criteria into making this kind of a decision on when the jobs come in to this system of the jobs that are currently waiting to be transcribed, and a transcriptionist comes in. What's the most important job for them? What's the best of all the pool to give to that transcription at that time? So there's things like, how old is it? What is the rate of pay for that particular job? Is it due fast? Is it a severe situation? There's probably maybe 20 different types of things that led into a problem of these 20 things. You have these 20 things that are going to affect the decision on which job to give to the transcription to be transcribed. All right, so that was a challenge for me to figure out what that is. So, when you're watching television and you see there's somebody, solving a mystery or something, and they run across something. There's a scene. A lot of shows do this. There's a scene where the person with this dilemma sees something completely unrelated, and he sees it, and he's immediately able to take what he just saw and I was looking at the live chat. You take what you just saw and kind of relate it to what your dilemma is that you're trying to solve, and you piece together something right away from that. So that happened to me for the first time. So I'm actually I knew what this dilemma was. You have these 20 different things that are going to lead to a decision on which job to give. So I just read the Stuff Maid's on. Hey, how you doing? So I'm at a traffic light on Northside Avenue or Northside Drive in Atlanta, and I'm going to the Kroger, right? And I'm at a stoplight, and over to my left, I look out, and there's a Domino's pizza place right here, and two cars are about to pull out, and one of them decides, I'm going to go right, and the other one decides, I'm going to go left. And I was sitting there at the traffic light thinking, I wonder how they know. How do they know which way to go? Now, this was before the internet, okay, so I was thinking, okay, say you have a city of Domino's pizzas, places, and you have customers, and you have the actual making of the pizza and the delivery of the pizza. That problem is actually very similar to my dilemma I had with this dictation. So I started thinking about, how do they know which way to go? That's based on traffic, that's based on time of day, that's based on how long the pizza has been in process to be ordered. How far do they have to travel? Of the available Domino's pizzas in this location, like a big city, which pizza place, because of their backlog, is the best pizza place based on their backlog, their availability drivers, and the location of the customer? Which one is the best one to route that particular job to get made? So it's actually almost the exact same problem as mine with this transcriptionist. So I started looking into things. Is this the traveling salesman problem? Is this the other type of problem? So I started looking at ways of deciding this particular kind of dilemma, and I came across. I eventually found decision theory. Now, decision theory is a way where you have all these inputs. You know, in the hospital world, it's the doctor prefers this transcriptionist. The job is this amount old, this time old. The deadline for it is this. All these different things that attribute to the inputs to the system. In the pizza world, it's you know, which pizza place does it go to? Where does it get made? What's a backlog at that pizza place? Are there drivers available? How long is the distance? How long has the order been in the queue? It's the same problem. So with that, what you end up doing is you take those inputs and you weight them. And when you weight them, it ultimately becomes a giant matrixy manipulation. And you have a series of weights, you have all the jobs, and you're basically doing like probably like a dot product of two matrices together, and you do the dot product, and then you sort that by value, and the one with the highest value or the lowest value or whatever is the best match for this job, for that transcription at this time. And it turns out that back in those days, this was, what did I say, 1998? It's about 1998. I think this was Pentium 5 days. It certainly wasn't multi-core days yet, but you could do this matrixy manipulation on very fast. And if you had a giant matrix, you could actually use parallel processing, which is how supercomputers actually end up working. Back then, they were using a thing called MPI, which is multiprocessor I don't know what, the interface or something like that. And you could split this matrixy into chunks, and then take those chunks and put them back together. So in today's world, that's called scatter and gather. But you could split this apart into in different machines, and actually increase your efficiency if your matrixy got to be too big. And so it turns out I learned about that when I was doing my postdoc at the University of Texas, because this is a very similar type of problem they have for computational fluid dynamics. So I took Domino's Pizza, computational fluid dynamics, decision theory, and I came up with an algorithm, and I ran it on, still an account at Georgia Tech. So I ran this multiprocess analysis on 3 Unix machines there, and was able to get it to calculate, like, if we had 5,000 doctors and 10,000 transcriptionists and 50,000 jobs, I could determine with, I don't know, probably like a second, which was the best job to give that person at the right time. So I gave this presentation at this company, and it was so simple to them. They really didn't think it was going to work. It was too simple. But there was some... So, at the same time, I was working with the engineers, trying to get them to see that I was not evil. Okay, I wasn't there. But I ended up turning the lead engineer by... he had like a postcard on his wall of probably like the B-52s. And we started talking one day about that postcard. And it turns out he was like a big new wave punk guy. You know, you wouldn't think of it at the time, but back in 1980, that's what he used to listen to, which was also what I used to listen to. So we struck up a conversation about music. And at that point, I became not an evil person, and he kind of was open to hearing my suggestions and taking them. So because I got him, I was able to push decision theory into their problem, and they were able to verify that this was the way to go, and they started writing the software for this. And they were writing it on Windows NT. And at the time, when Windows NT came out, there's only a few databases that they could choose from. But there was a database that came with Windows NT called the registry, the Windows registry. And I'm in a meeting, and they're talking about implementing decision theory using the database called the Windows registry. Now, if you've ever edited the Windows registry, you get this warning. You could potentially make your system unstable. Do you want to continue? So Windows registry is where Windows keeps all the settings. And it's probably like a key value pair today. And if you set one of those the wrong way, you could make it unstable, and you could make it so it doesn't boot. Or processes don't work. Something happens and you may not be able to recover. They wanted to use that database because it was available. And I told them in a public meeting, I told them that they were nuts. They were crazy for even thinking about that. There has to be another way of doing it. And it became kind of a heated. I was being a pain in the ass. Because at that point, I thought, I hadn't been doing a lot of consulting at that time. And I thought management had my back. They hired me specifically to do this job, and I'm doing my job. Okay? So that day was over. The next day, they brought me into the office, and they said, this is my bosses. There were two of them. We'll call them, what names are we going to use? John and, Kay. They called me in and they said, well, you've been here for a while. You've definitely done some really good work for us, but we're sorry to say we're going to have to let you go. And I started laughing. And I was like, really? I said, you're crazy. You're not going to get done. He goes, well, we really have. You've taken us farther than we thought we would get. And we're just going to have to let you go. It's just not going to work out. And so I was out of a job. And this was in 1999. And I was like, all right. So I'd saved a lot of money by then. And I bought a new truck. And I was living in Florida. And so I decided I'll just go back to Florida and figure out what I'm going to do. All right. So there was... I ended up moving to Boston, and it took me about 2 years to kind of come to terms with getting fired, because I was like a top student, a PhD. I'd done that successful programmable additive injector. I did my first startup. I've worked for several companies, and I basically had a big head on my shoulders, and I had an ego that was wildly inflated. And getting fired forced me to think, why did I actually get fired? And I thought about it. I literally thought about it for 2 years, and I figured out a critical point to the entire nuance of what it is to be a consultant. And that is, let's talk about the different ways that you get hired as a freelancer. Okay, and then we'll come back to the consultant, because a very specific thing happens when you're a consultant. So, for a long time, I was hired for 2 reasons. One of them, I'm a fireman. A company hires me because I have experience, they have a problem, they have an immediate problem, and they needed to get the fire put out right away. So they'll hire me as a fireman. I'll come in, look at the thing, find the problem, and fix it. That's very time constrained, and it's pretty stressful because they're either losing money or they don't have lost a key employee or whatever it is, and they need some immediate support for that. So I was either hired as a fireman or an architect. An architect is where you come in, a company hires you specifically because they want to take things in a new direction. And for a long time, I was working either as a fireman or as an architect. Either one was fine. The fact that I'm working somewhere was fine with me. But it turns out, okay, so in terms of the hiring process and your relationship with a company, you have several different types of relationships they're going to be. You have a contractor, where contractors brought in to kind of do something very specific and they actually do the work. Then you have a consultant come in and kind of, investigate what's going on, determine what the real problems are, finding a potential solution, and just recommending this solution. Then you have part-time people, you have full-time people. Then there's opportunities. It just hadn't happened to me, but you could get hired on retainer. So they're allocating some of your time, and they pay you whether they take it or not. Okay, that's a pretty cushy gig there. But I had never been hired on a container, and then a retainer container, and then the last one is you actually work at a startup, and we'll cover a little bit more about the startups in the future episodes. But tonight we're going to talk about. Okay, so my first job with Loral Data Systems, I was hired as a contractor. They had a very specific problem they wanted to be investigated, and I did the work, and I produced a report and sent it back to them. That's a contractor. The chemical additive injector was a contractor. I've also worked part-time. I worked full-time, and I've been involved in about 10 to 15 startups. And in terms of full-time, I didn't really take my first full-time job at a company until I was like 49. All right, and so talk about that in future episodes as well. But tonight we're talking about being a consultant. So this dictation company hired me as a consultant. They wanted me to come in and determine what their problems were, and their problem that they wanted me to solve was this thing about where I came up with decision theory. And then I got fired. And so what ends up happening when you get hired as a consultant is all the engineers hate the fact that you're there. And if you don't know anything about what they're doing, it's even worse. Because it gives the signal to the engineers that the management that basically kind of manages them and makes decisions is not confident in their own internal abilities. That's what, from an engineering perspective, that's the way they look at it. And so if you get hired as a consultant, there's a good chance that you're not going to get met with a lot of, they're, in my experience, they don't like the fact that you're there. So you have to do a lot of relationship things. And in that 2-year period, I realized that in this relationship building as a consultant, it's not my job to do their job. In fact, my job is to find a problem and convince them of this idea so that they can run with it and they can be the shining stars in the companies. I'm not going to be there after a while. I'm going to get done and I'm going to go on to something else. Those people are going to be the long-term employees that are actually going to implement the idea. So as a consultant, you come in and you give your advice, you talk to people, you try to let them see the different way, and you need them to take all the credit. And so it completely changed what I ended up doing as a consultant. That one fact was, I'm not doing it right. Those people need to be the stars. And I need to highlight, my job is really to make them the superstars in their organization. That's what my job as a consultant was. So that was really a major change to what when I go on to doing future consulting, what they would actually, how I changed my stance. And I got to use all that knowledge later for a different company. And I was able to overcome that relationship thing really quickly because I had struggled with it so much when at the dictation company. So I actually came in and made it very clear that I'm not there to take their jobs. I'm only here to show you there is a different way that you should consider. That's what my job was, and to make them the heroes. Okay, so getting fired. At some point, probably about 4 3 or 4 years ago, my wife's company had a situation where they had to let somebody go. They had to fire him. Something happened at work that was intolerable, and go in and fire this employee. And I thought a lot about what had happened to me when I actually got fired. And so I called those two people. Well, who did I call them? John and Kay. I called them on the phone. Got their phone numbers. Called them on the phone. And this was probably 15 years after they fired me. And I said, yeah, I got to thank you for firing me. And they're like, what? And I said, yeah, it changed everything in the way that I work. And I want to, I've been very successful because you fired me that day. And they're like, well, this is a call I never thought I would get. And they were very happy to find out that the decision that they agonized over, they didn't need to, because I ended up being a much better engineer because of that. And then later, here's a good one. When I wrote the Embedded Linux book, I got hired by that company. I got hired by a company that I think they did storage products in Minnesota or something like that. And I went up and taught a seminar at their company. And it turns out at that company, the director of engineering was that same guy that came down to Florida to ask me what my process was. And I'm like, wow, what goes around comes around. This was literally probably 20 years after that. And I went and I had lunch with this guy, and I got to tell him, I said, you know what, Joe? A lot of things changed when you asked me what is your process. Because I had a decision to make. Was I going to give you a line, or was I going to tell you the truth? And I decided at that point, I have to tell you the truth. And as much as it made me look bad, it actually made me look good from a different perspective, because he got a legitimate ascertainment of the situation and was able to make a decision based on that. And I told him, I said, if I don't know something, I just lay it out there. If I have bad news, I laid it out there. And he said, well, that's good, because you don't hear a lot of that. He was happy to hear that one as well. Okay, so I think that wraps it up for tonight. No technical things other than if you are... Oh, there's one more thing I didn't write down here. One thing I never considered in all the things I've done, I had really one advisor, one person I could talk to, and that was my older brother. He was an engineer that worked at a government contractor. And I would ask him engineering things. He was a full-time employee, and he was basically a digital designer, and then when he went into management. And I was able to run some ideas by him. But what I didn't get, I didn't find an advisor for being a contractor, being certainly a consultant, or working at a startup. I never found that type of person. I just got thrown in and kind of figured it out along the way. And now, as 33 years later, if somebody comes and asks me to give them some advice, I give it to them, whether they take it or not. It's not really up to me. I just tell them, my experience. And fortunately, there's a lot more resources to find an advisor now, as well as mechanisms to get hooked up with someone that can give you some advice. So if you're thinking about going out on your own, which I got to tell you that for now 30 plus years I've worked for myself, and a lot of people want to start doing that. You should really find an advisor to find out really what is involved in making that step for quitting a full-time job and becoming a consultant. There's a lot to learn there. It's very interesting. Sometimes it's stressful. A lot of times it's really enjoyable. And if you're thinking about doing it, you really should do it. But consult with people that have done this exact thing before, and find out some things that you really hadn't thought about when it's time for you to make that jump into doing consulting work or contract work. All right, well, I'm going to wrap it up for tonight. I'd like to thank everyone that sat in, and we are going to actually get done in 40 minutes. So this has been Tech Talk for Grandpa number 6, where I talk about getting fired and a significant impact it's made on my life in terms of how I develop relationships with internal people, and as well as working with integrity. All right, thanks for watching. Good night.